Zionism, Islam, and the West by Kerry Bolton. Reading and podcast. America's Jihad. The Islamic State organization seems to have arisen overnight, well-armed and swiftly moving through Iraq and Syria, seemingly unstoppable. One might wonder as to how plausible it is to believe the CIA, U.S. National Security Council, and Mossad supposedly hitherto knew little or nothing of the Islamic State jihadists. We are apparently expected to believe that they appeared from nowhere as if by magic. It is apt to recall the present Jihad boogeyman arose from the Mujahideen, which was formed by the CIA as a guerrilla force against the Russians in Afghanistan. The clash of civilizations, as neocon historians refer to the war on terrorism, was a contrivance, not the result of an inexorable historical law. By the end of the First World War, much goodwill existed between the Entente and the Arabs who had fought together against the Ottoman Empire, with the expectation that the Arab states would achieve independence, thanks to the heroic efforts of T.E. Lawrence and the Arabic fighters. The guerrilla war against the Turks had been crucial to the war effort, although subsequently besmirched by Zionist propagandists. Thanks to Zionist machinations, the Entente had spoken with a forked tongue to the Arabs while making a contrary promise to the Zionists to back a Jewish state in Palestine in return for Jewish influence supporting the Entente cause, by then in a predicament in the USA. The result was the Balfour Declaration and needless prolongation of the war, so that the Zionists and the Messianists would get their nose poked into Palestine until such time as being able to dump themselves en masse after the Second World War. And he's romanticizing the Arabs a little bit here and leaving out T.E. Lawrence's connections to the elites who brought him and other people in that favored Sufism. And they weren't all good people, and you see, we believe in a constrained world and a fallen world where there's problems, and these people have been fighting with each other for a very long time. And I would agree that we shouldn't have stuck our nose in there and made it worse. But it's not just that the Jews are the only bad guys in history or that America's the only bad guys. Now, Osama bin Laden's right when we're talking about the bin Laden letter that's coming out of nowhere all of a sudden for what looks like a psyop and color revolution. Now, you could make the point in there, and in an as-if manner, that putting Israel there was no good. But they're playing this game where it's all like progressive women reading this shit, that America's bad, so they can go get involved in color revolution. And it's activating the conservatives and giving them talking points to get the neocon bullshit going again. It is also opportune at this point to recall those who introduced terrorism into Palestine. The Irgun, Stern, and Palmach Underground regarded the British as the new Nazis, and for that matter, anyone who stood in the way of their messianic dreams. Hence, United Nations envoy Count Folke Bernadette, who had negotiated for thousands of Jews to leave German-occupied territory, was gunned down by the sternest because his suggestion for the boundaries of Israel were regarded as an affront to Jewry. Ultimately, the Zionist dream for Israel extends the boundaries from the rivers of the Nile to the Euphrates, Genesis 15:18. And any compromise of captured territory would mean the surrendering of the deeds of a promise from God himself, unless there is a longer-term motive involved. There cannot be peace in the Middle East until that dream is forgotten, which is not going to happen, any more than the aim of rebuilding the Temple of Solomon upon the ruins of the Al-Aqsa Mosque as the prerequisite for the coming of the Jewish Messiah. The declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of the world and the elimination of idolatrous religions to be replaced by the 7 Noahide laws already promulgated by U.S. Congress, which came from Rebbe Sneerson. As the Israeli scholar Dr. Israel Shahak documented, such notions were alive and kicking in Israel, yet we are constantly told of Muslim fanaticism. We are also told of the hatred Islam possesses for Christianity, despite the recognition of Jesus as the great prophet and his mother. Now, this is bullshit right here, because they look at him as a prophet, but they hate that we call him God. And if you ever seen the aggressive manner they come and do apologetics, especially in areas that they control, to sit here and say that they just give us great honor all the time, some of them do. When I've talked to people who are Muslims in those countries that do, I believe, honestly care for their Christian neighbors, but some of them don't and are very aggressive. And Islamism is not good for anybody living under it. Even if a proportion of the society is able to do all right for itself economically, that doesn't mean they are not oppressed. Sometimes oppressed peoples do well because they're oppressed and in spite of it. Maybe even they got the grace of God. And this often pisses off the host population, especially if they have a warrior ethos and other people succeed in trades and businesses. They will attack them, and especially if they start making converts. We already talked about this with the Coptic women in Egypt. So to think that this doesn't always happen, or that we don't have people saying on your knees, gimp, and like Muhammad hijab, and other people don't subscribe to this and are not theologically justified because you make this word concept fallacy and try to make a perennialist case that we have the same belief. This is where Kerry Bolton is full of shit. Now, sometimes you'll also see somebody be a little bit overkind towards the Jews from Christianity or from the Muslims when they're actually living in there and they are an official and they want to continue helping people for pastoral reasons. But a lot of times they will send that information out via other currents, and we will find out about it from other Christians in our churches and speak of it outside of there. I've also seen people put up the pictures of Muslims crucifying Christians in Eastern Europe, the same ones Kerry Bolton talked about. Well, we can't just go throw money at somebody and make them want to kill Christians. You actually have to have something there to dump resources into. I can't just go into the Middle East and tell everybody to become Billy Graham evangelicals. It doesn't matter how much money I throw at it, it's not going to happen. You have to latch onto something that's already there, and there's already desires for jihad. There's also many different groups and ethnicities that have been in combat in the Middle East and Eastern Europe that don't like each other and hate each other over quite some time. It's a point that Jim Jatras brought up with Buck Johnson, that there are so many blood feuds and vendettas and problems and age-old hatreds in Eastern Europe between all these different peoples that were part of the clash between Orthodoxy, Western Catholicism, and Islam, and things going back before that too, with the Roman Empire and the Ottomans and the Persians. And the word Slav is where we get slave from. These people were really put upon by the bigger empires that were near them, the Roman times, and there's been a lot of brutality built up here. And then they were in the middle of the world wars. And we have no business sticking our nose there, and we don't even understand the way some of these people hate each other, and we should not be there playing politics. But you see Christians being crucified and burned by some of the same kinds of Muslims that Kerry Bolton himself talked about in this book, and he's going to get into, I think, in this chapter too, if I'm not mistaken, that are used to kill Christians. Well, I see people on Twitter saying, ortho dog kebab, this is what should happen, you and your mother will be our sex slaves, all this shit. That was justified. It was justified. I know the neocons like to overdo this talking point, not put any of this other context of our interventionism and an installation of Israel, making things worse and allowing both the Islamization, which Kerry Bolton himself talked about, and the Zionist infiltration by making Israel our proxy state. We've given power to them to exert upon us, just like we are doing right now. Now we have CARE, Center of American Islamic Relations. You have the UAE exerting its force. So to sit here and just say that the Muslims are always going to be good to us and nice, and they think the same thing we think, this isn't exactly true. I know it's true for many people. There's many normal people in each religion that are just doing good things and keeping their head down. We would call this the energies of God that they're interacting with and virtues that are there. And there are moral laws written on everybody's heart. And for any civilization to thrive, there are good people. We have the tale of the Good Samaritan, where we are put to shame by a heretic. The Levitical priest is put to shame by the heretic who does kindness. My neighbor who's Islamic is a good man. He's a very hard worker, and I don't think he would actually think these types of things. So that when they make these points here to compare how much the Talmud hates us, it's true, but they don't exactly think the same thing. And there's syncretic outliers and versions of Islam, and there's modernists, people who are more liberal or culturally Islamic. But that also undermines the case that they're going to be the solution to liberalism. And you will see people like Daniel Hikikaju. Daniel Hikikaju will make this point out of both sides of his face. One second he's going to be Mr. Tough Guy. We're going to solve liberalism. The West is so weak. Christianity is a weak religion. But then in the other one, he gets stronger by appealing to liberalism and calling everything colonialism that's in his way. and then appealing to academia, lying out of his face as though all academia agrees with Islam and thinks it's true, but Christianity's bullshit. Well, there's plenty of people who've picked Islam apart or don't like his version of it, or who are atheists. So he wouldn't even debate apostate prophet because of this. Even though he might have some points against him about Israel, he knows this shit's going to come up in debate. So they lie. They lie out of both sides of their face, some of these people. That doesn't mean there's not good, devout Muslims. And many of them are more devout, quite frankly, because they haven't been fully modernized yet. You're seeing the apostasy wave that's coming as these places industrialize and also as they come to the West. This is a problem for every religion. But if you actually still have a real religious society, just like some of the older, more Orthodox Christian countries over there, you're going to have a more devout people. And then in this way, I think they are better than a lot of Westerners, but this also applies to your Coptic Christians that live under oppression, to the Orthodox Christians that are living, and other types of Christians that are living in Palestine or in the gray zone in Israel in more poverty. They are as strong, their faith is stronger, and they're probably better people. The hatred of Talmudic Jews for Christianity is frequently, let's go back. Meanwhile, he goes into this recognition of Jesus as a great prophet and his mother. Meanwhile, Talmudic Judaism teaches that Jesus was the son of a whore and a Roman soldier, Pandira, and is in hell boiling in semen. And, you're not going to get that on the Fox News. You're not going to hear all these Christian conservatives talk about how we're supposed to support this when it's based on a lie. That doesn't mean I hate all Jews, but that's something you're not going to hear about. The hatred of Talmudic Jews for Christianity is frequently manifested by the Orthodox custom of spitting on monks and priests, and in many other ways, again documented by Shahak. In short, the origins of the present Middle East terrorism stem from Franco-British duplicity and Zionist machinations during the First World War, and rampant religious lunacy from Judaism rather than Islam. And we could also get into the British. Jay Dyer's got great lectures about the history of Israel and Palestine, and has gone deep into the British because they're so involved in espionage and the elites. As the political and judicial theorist Dr. Carl Schmitt pointed out, an outer enemy is often the prerequisite for the formation or maintenance of unity among disparate elements. Hence, Zionism requires anti-Semitism to exist. Israel requires the myth of belligerent Arab neighbors ever ready to run them into the Dead Sea. The USA requires a new global boogeyman after the demise of the USSR to maintain its role as the world's big brother, albeit one of a particularly vulgar and bullying type. And you're seeing this evolve now with globalism and linking up with the EU and the UN with this Fabian socialist Malthusian kind of Council of 300 stuff going on, where we're going to have a climate apocalypse and we need transhumanism, we need our singularity, we need dataism, we need CBDC and total monitoring, panopticon singularity. We need all this stuff to save the planet. We got to have less footprints. You got Hindus like Sadhguru going around saying there's the problem with carbon footprints is there's too many feet. While Putin's Russia has so we got this boogeyman we've made up. And now we need the whole world to solve it. And we can't have, Russia messing this up and keeping, trade and energy routes into Europe so that traditionalist countries can throw the EU the fuck out and say no to the Great Reset. And then, Davos and Soros and all these people and our pedophile elites get in trouble for releasing a virus on the world, which they have not been held to account for and are probably going to do again. With this war, too, to go into, which they seem to be dividing our country up into color revolution. And I think, too, with some of this, they're allowing some of these things we're talking about to be talked about in a stupid-ass way and blowing people like Gage up. And then you get real anti-Semitism as though it's justified and you're going to get away with it. And then they'll probably throw you under the bus and cancel you. And if they fail to do that and the anti-Semitism wins, they'll turn anti-Semitic. These people don't care. They're evil. They don't care. As long as one side or one synthesis wins out in the dialectic, which as we know from reading Fr Seraphim Rose, the dialectic There's only one person behind it. That's Satan. And it's to keep us away from the true God. So it doesn't matter whether the Zionism wins, the Islam, or a syncretism, or a crooked Christianity. They don't care. They'll bait you into a trap with this. And instead of talking about this stuff properly, like I'm doing right now, without being an anti-Semite, whatever, these people are going to call you an anti-Semite if you talk about this stuff anyway. And if we don't win and beat these people, that's God's plan. But if we don't win and beat these people, it doesn't matter if you are an anti-Semite or not, or if you support Israel. The same cancel culture that's going to be used for this and the war powers they're going to get, you're going to be toast no matter what you said. If you don't completely, if you're a retard, if you're over here, Mr. Conservative, boomer, tough guy, Israel, we got to bomb them savages. Can't be saying that because it's anti-Semitic. What are you, some kind of Groiper Nazi? Well, guess what, buddy? If you can't talk about this right and you blow that Groiper stuff up because you won't talk about the problems here, when they make these anti-Semitism speech laws and you get Nikki Haley type policies, the trans shit, that's fucking coming next, bud. I could tell you that right now. You won't be allowed, they'll start with the anti-Semitism, and right after that, you're not going to be able to call somebody their actual gender. You're not going to be able to say anything about transgenderism, about the LGBTQ movement, grooming your kids. The race stuff's going to come in off of that. All of it. You're an idiot if you want to do this. And you're walking right into a third world war. And we're using now, for half the populace, the Arabs still are the boogeyman, but for the other half of the populace, the Jews are the boogeyman. So if we can't actually talk about how certain ones are actually infesting our government from multiple angles, you have Chinese influence, you have Zionist influence, now you're having Islamic influence. You have CARE and all this stuff now because we've propped these people up as our proxies, and now they become a part of our country and they move here. I have politicians in my area running who are Muslims. So you could use this stuff as a dialectic, but in using another people as your proxies, they use you too. You empower them. So this is going on. So half the country has the Muslims as their boogeyman, half has Israel as their boogeyman right now. And they're drumming it up and perverting any legitimate critique of either side of that into something stupid. And they're blocking out real people that could be talking about it. I've talked about, Candace Owens a few times. And I've tried to use this opportunity in the Overton window to move our people, and I've been polite and respectful, but I don't entirely trust it. This could be a dog and pony show for us. WWF shit. Get everybody going, thinking you're going to stop it. I wouldn't trust none of these people. We can trust in God, and that's it. You can trust in Christ. But don't trust these people. All we're doing is trying to put forward the case for the truth. And if people don't want to hear the truth after they hear what we have to say, God himself will not stop it. The world at one point will reject Christ and go into tribulations. That will happen. If we have an opportunity to do the right thing and stop it the right way in a manner that actually brings people together, because Christ says, all who do not gather to me scatter. If we don't have one single truth, or we compromise that and turn it into something else, it will end badly. These people want to trade one problem for another. For the Jewish solution, Islam. For the solution for Islam, the Jews. This was the batshit crazy thinking that Andres Breivik had. Go kill a bunch of people because they want to boycott Israel. And we need them out there in what we talked about in preemptive war, which is the neocon strategy. Always have preemptive warfare. Very much, even in a secular frame, it would be much in line with Ian McGilchrist's left hemispheric thinking, which is predatory and always attacks first. So we're being drummed up into this. And I've noticed too, as I've tried to get a tiny bit of clout to get this content looked at and push the orthosphere when these things are being talked about, which I'm about sick and tired of and done with. And I think I'm just going to keep making content here. It depersonalizes everything, and it makes you start to think and act in that manner, which I think is part of what they want. So they want to we have to be the good guys. The USA has the right. So we do see ourselves as the even bigger brother now, because now it's beyond the USA. It's globalist. We're all going to come together and save the planet. And anybody stopping that is an evil demon that's going to bring us to our ruin and kill the whole human race. While Putin's Russia has somewhat served the role once occupied by the USSR, it is difficult to embed the notion into the world's consciousness that Putinism, like Sovietism, supposedly aims at world conquest, and only the USA can stop this. An added factor is required. Jihadism serves these purposes for both the USA and Israel. Where would the USA have been since the implosion of the Soviet bloc, had it not been for jihadism? Largely obliged to mind its own business for the first time since before Woodrow Wilson. Mujahideen, a U.S. creation. The ground for jihadism was sown by the U.S. arming of the Mujahideen against the USSR in Afghanistan. The CIA describes its role in founding jihadism. I'm drawing a blank, but there's actually some books, too, about the way the Nazis worked with the Mujahideen, or would be their precursors as well. And so did Russia, and so did the Allied forces. So that this didn't just start here. Then some of this went on in the guerrilla warfare with T.E. Lawrence and stuff too. And Skorzeny, who Israel used as well. Mossad let Skorzeny out when they had him in prison, just as he walked out of a U.S. military prison, just walked right out the front door to go down to the Middle East where a lot of Nazis went, and worked with these different groups. When we installed Gaddafi, he worked there. He advised PLO, and he worked as a hitman for Mossad and killed people for Mossad, while at the same time working with the Arabs. And you could make a case, too, that the U.S. installed government in Egypt is made to be pro-Israel, even though the population is anti-Israel. The ground for jihadism was sown by the U.S. arming of the Mujahideen against the USSR in Afghanistan. The CIA describes its role in founding jihadism. After this, and this is the CIA itself, and you'll even see factcheck.org and like more mainline sources that are supposed to be respectable try to twist this with sophistry. If you go Google this stuff to say, no, we didn't help create this, we didn't create bin Laden, and they'll play these little games like, we gave money to the Taliban, but not directly to bin Laden, but then it started going to him while he played both sides. So we say, well, because we technically didn't give it directly to him. No, the CIA never used him. It's bullshit. And it shows you when we're supposed to be the bad guys here and they're releasing this bin Laden video, when they want to play these games with the bin Laden letter, or when they want to be anti-American and say it's our fault for starting all these problems, then they'll turn around the same kinds of fucking sources and say, no, well, actually, they never worked with the CIA. The CIA never made these people. The games they play, it's the same thing too. You'll see 60 Minutes and all the left-wing media right now, half of them are going pro-Israel and drumming us up the way we did after 9/11 for Iraq. And then when it's time, they'll become anti-war. They'll become anti-war, anti-Israel, and drum up the radicals for the internal color revolution they got us geared for. This is the CIA here. After the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December 1979, President Carter directed the CIA to assist the Afghan Mujahideen. CIA came to see the indigenous Afghan opposition to the Soviets was less an organized movement than widespread opposition by villages and tribes. Through Pakistan, CIA provided Mujahideen with money, weapons, medical supplies, and communications equipment. And remember, Pakistan was installed by the British to divide the Muslim and Indian world. This is a divide and conquer tactic that Mark Curtis gets to in depth in his Secret Affairs, coming from a completely different angle than Kerry Bolton. So if you see the way Bat Yor talks about these things, the way Kerry Bolton talks about them, the way Mark Curtis talks about them, you get these opposing views that are all kind of confirming each other, and it fills in the gaps. Initially, the goal was to drain Soviet resources by keeping their forces bogged down. In 1985, the CIA shifted from a plan of attrition to one that would help the rebels win. One of the pivotal moments came in September 1986 when the Mujahideen used CIA-provided Stinger missiles to shoot down 3 Soviet Mi-24D helicopter gunships. As part of this escalation of financial and material support, President Reagan issued new guidance that put the CIA into more direct contact with rebel commanders, beginning an era of CIA interaction with tribal and local leaders that continues through the post-9/11 era. And if you look back here, if you watch the third Rambo, The Arabs are the good guys. The Taliban fighting the evil Russians are the good guys, and Rambo's got to go learn to ride horses with them, and play their games with the dead goat and stuff, and crawl through the barbed wire to stop the Russians. But how the tables have turned. The CIA then supported the Northern Alliance against the Taliban government. The CIA also claims that it supported the Northern Alliance against al-Qaeda and bin Laden when they moved into Afghanistan from the Sudan. However, an NBC report states of CIA support for bin Laden. As his unclassified CIA biography states, bin Laden left Saudi Arabia to fight the Soviet army in Afghanistan after Moscow's invasion in 1979. By 1984, he was running a front organization known as Maktab al-Khidmar, the MAC, which funneled money, arms, and fighters from the outside world into the Afghan war. What the CIA bio conveniently fails to specify, in its unclassified form at least, is that the MAK was nurtured by Pakistan's State Security Services, the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or ISA, the CIA's primary conduit for conducting the covert war against Moscow's occupation. The CIA, concerned with the factionalism of Afghanistan, found that Arab zealots who flocked to the aid of Afghans were easier to read than the rivalry-ridden natives. While the Arab volunteers might well prove troublesome later, the agency reasoned they at least were one-dimensionally anti-Soviet for now. So bin Laden, along with a small group of Islamic militants from Egypt, Pakistan, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestinian refugee camps all over the Middle East, became the reliable partners of the CIA in its war against Moscow. These Afghan veterans became the nucleus for jihadists further afield. And you have to remember something too. The Muslim world would like to reclaim its greatness. They would like to get out from under our thumb and to be the ones running things. They would like to get out from the thumb of Russia too. They're siding more with Russia because Russia's more on their side, but one reason they were against Russia at this time was because of communism. They didn't want to be in a communist, godless country. We have saints who say things like, under the rule of the Turks, even though it was brutal and evil and horrible, at least the Christians were not estranged from God as under communism. They say 500 years under the Turks was not as bad as decades under the Soviets. While these idiots are going around trying to say Stalin's church was good and Stalin was more orthodox than people over here who are LARPing. Well, guess what? Everybody LARPing in the early church when it spread everywhere? It's supposed to go to new converts. You guys are idiots. But this is what, Henkel wants to talk about Stalinists, how he beat Ben Shapiro with Stalinists, but he'll never bring up the Orthodox stuff and actually dismantle Christian Zionism. You would think with such a big platform, if you can, table your intellectualism, but then bring it out with somebody like Haz, who's supposed to be this great intellectual, you would think you would, actually go and take maybe an hour or two here out of the month to really lay out a sophisticated case against the elites the way somebody like Jay Dyer does. And that you would level the Christian Zionism, without which there is no Zionism. But that's not what he's here for. He's here to keep it going and be somebody out of the chaos and get color revolution and dialectics going. And if the government gets its way, all you people who think you're so tough and based, you'll be classified as terrorists and anti-Semites and thrown in prison and canceled. And if you win, we'll be a Nazi state or Stalinist or some new syncretism into something else that's not good. Serbia targeted. When the U.S. globalists wanted to dismember Yugoslavia and globalize the wealth of Kosovo, we find again the Mujahideen. The USA claims to be fighting Islamic terrorism worldwide. Milosevic's Serbia was on the front line fighting against Islamic terrorism. Rather than U.S. support for the Serbs, the support went to Islamist terrorists and gangsters. Serbs had been the target of Islamists for decades. They also aimed to carve out a greater Albania by annexing Kosovo. The U.S. NATO interest was that of privatizing globalizing the vast mineral wealth and other resources of the region run by the state. We see this going on in places like the Congo and Lundin with Hillary Clinton. There's a lot of natural gas in Palestine. So there's always things like this going on. You see BlackRock getting to go in and rebuild the area of Ukraine. Mineral resources are pretty important now too if you want to make like electrical vehicles and chips, space technology. In 1998, the Kosovo Liberation Army was described by U.S. Special Envoy to Bosnia, Robert Gilbert, as terrorists. The U.S. State Department had previously prepared a report detailing the methods of the KLA to intimidate Kosovoan Albanian ethnics into supporting them, prior to Milosevic's intervention to restore order. U.S. official sources were reporting the Albanian ethnics were fleeing their villages in their entirety to escape the KLA. Also well known by American and European police agencies were the drug trafficking connections the KLA had with organized crime in Europe and Turkey. The KLA aim was for a greater Albania, including parts of Serbia, Greece, Macedonia, and Montenegro. And there is a great chapter on Islamization in Ratio's book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, that gets very in detail in this and gets into a lot of funding of it. It comes from your Rockefellers and your Rothschilds and your BP, and there's a money trail in the whole fifth column that's installed by these Rothschilds and other elites, to include Zionists and anti-Zionists, who played this game and backed all this taking of land and Russian containment. And this goes all the way back into Quigley and Sutton as well, that Jay Dyer gets into in such detail, that's completely left out by these MAGA Marxists. You want a full, broad scope picture too, that isn't just evil anti-Semitism, but can say no to Zionism. In a way, they have no actual moral high ground on you. And you want to know the other elites and the ideas that are being wrought into action here, with some truth and a place you can go that's an actual church that can support your life, your marriage, your kids, point you in a good direction besides a bunch of idiots being online for MAGA Marxism. Here's a whole argumentation, and it can actually defend tradition, and it can actually win, and it's actually good. And you can actually understand what's going on here, but get beyond the politics too. There's so much more to offer, and it's completely shadow-banned and kept out of the conversation for this retarded bullshit. So if you want to take everything Bolton's saying here, I would suggest going listening to Dyer's lectures that also get into the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. And if you want to read that, there's a PDF. It's a little bit hard to find. He's got links to purchase the hard copy, and there's a PDF that you have to search from DuckDuckGo because it will not show up on Google. You try to find that PDF of Milner-Fabian conspiracy on Google, guess what? It don't show up, at least not till way later. At least not where I live. Chris Hedges, when New York Times Balkans Bureau Chief, 1995 through 1998, wrote in Foreign Affairs of a map of the Greater Albania found at a KLA compound, Hedges reported, between 1966 and 1989, an estimated 130,000 Serbs left the province because of the frequent harassment and discrimination by the Kosovar Albanian majority. Hedges mentioned the funding that the KLA was receiving from Islamic states and the presence of mujahideen in the KLA staging area in northern Albania. In 1981, the Associated Press reported that 4,000 Serbs fled Kosovo due to anti-Serb riots and the desecration of Orthodox churches and graves. So here's this use against the church, always. They're number one enemy. It's not to say other peoples aren't put upon or other types of Christians aren't persecuted, or Jews and Muslims don't have their times and places where they're persecuted, or the retaliation in defending oneself against this type of stuff doesn't become very bloody and bad. But you can see this stuff is backed. And our media made the Christians look like the bad guys while we backed these Muslims to kill people. And nobody's talking about it. Everyone who's saying we have to stop Islam because it's so barbaric, nobody's talking about stopping it here. It's completely out of the news. Completely. But we gotta help the Zionists, and they're the only way we're gonna stop the Muslims. And you have Jews saying that Christians should be worshiping them because they're out there for, stopping the orcs, which referring to the Muslims. When Serb forces attacked Srebrenica, it was to end the armed attacks mounted from the Islamist bases on nearby villages. A news report of the Times cites intelligence sources as stating that it was harassment which precipitated the Serb attack on the 1,500 Muslim defenders inside the enclave. General Filipe Morlan, commander of the UN troops in Bosnia, 1992 through 1993, testified before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia that Muslim forces based in Srebrenica had engaged in attacks during Orthodox holidays and destroyed villages, massacring all the inhabitants. This created a degree of hatred that was quite extraordinary in the region. Between May and December 1992, Muslim forces repeatedly attacked Serb villages around Srebrenica, killing and torturing civilians. Some were mutilated and burned alive. Muslim forces in Srebrenica murdered over 1,300 Serbs and had ethnically cleansed a vast area. The London Spectator reported that during 1992 through 1995, the Pentagon helped Islamists from Central Asia to reach Bosnia and join the Bosnian Muslims, stating, "As part of the Dutch government's inquiry into the Srebrenica massacre of July 1995, Professor Cees Wiebes of Amsterdam University compiled a report entitled, quote, Intelligence and the War on Bosnia, end quote, published in April 2002. In it, he details the secret alliance between the Pentagon and radical Islamic groups from the Middle East in their efforts to assist Bosnia's Muslims. By 1993, there was a vast amount of weapons smuggling through Croatia to the Muslims, organized by clandestine agencies of the USA, Turkey, and Iran, in association with a range of Islamic groups that included Afghan Mujahideen and the pro-Iranian Hezbollah. Arms brought by Iran and Turkey with the financial backing of Saudi Arabia were airlifted from the Middle East to Bosnia, airlifts which, Wiebes points out, the USA was very closely involved in. One of the stated war aims of NATO was that of Yugoslav Federation would become a free market economy. The fight for a free market economy was not an aim that seems to have been widely publicized by the spokesman for the U.S. State Department and British Foreign Office at the time. The prize was the Trepka mining complex, which had operated 24 hours a day, having the richest lead, lignite, and zinc deposits in Europe and one of the richest worldwide. Once the moral pontifications of the Rambouillet Decad were dispensed with, Chapter 4 makes the aim clear enough. Article 1. The economy of Kosovo shall function in accordance with the free market principles. A privatization agency of Kosovo was established, but the economy, including Trepka, remains in shambles. So you can see here, and this is where I think this idea, whether it's Hayek or somebody who thinks that free markets are going to solve everybody's problems and stop violence, or Jordan Peterson says, we got to have the market system and Abraham Accords and everybody making money is going to keep everybody happy. Well, by this logic, as long as we're spreading free markets, it doesn't matter who died on the way in that experiment. Now we modernize, we go through this painful evolution, and now everybody's on the same page and subject to these free markets where you can be subject to stakeholder capitalism like Klaus Schwab. And you see Dave Rubin, Peterson's buddy, another Daily Wire guy, him and his husband, when the surrogate woman who signed a contract wanted to keep the baby, they took it from her as though it's property. Because you signed a motherfucking contract. Here's your stakeholder capitalism, bud, and this is the kind of surrogacy and degeneracy that's going to be spread. And even if Dave Rubin and his husband are good fathers, or whatever the fuck, it will normalize it for a bunch of people that are going to be pedophiles and fuck their kids. So we shouldn't be supporting this. This capitalism is not the number one value. So when Candace Owens is called out, whether she's genuine or not, and I take her at the value of saying Christ is king until proven otherwise. When she's saying one cannot serve two masters, and little Ben Shapiro here comes out. If you think money comes between you and your God, then you're free to leave the Daily Wire. You can leave. Don't talk back. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I know he's not the boss of the Daily Wire, but he's an important influencer here. To say this, that one cannot serve two masters, means that religion and tradition come before the money, becomes before the capitalism. Doesn't mean we're against capital. It also doesn't mean you have to just quit your job if you disagree. You could put this out there in the public, and if you want to say you can't have this person working, or you want to cancel us because we will not abide by this and lower our religion and accept, Zionism that hates Christianity, or accept the idea that all religions think the same thing when we believe Christ is God, and we're not going to play the perennialism game anymore, and we don't have to fund you while you say you're going to fulfill the Messiah as though that's Christian, and we're not allowed to bring any of these things up or bring up the persecution of Christians when it interferes with neoconservative policy, which is about making this capitalism the main thing, and having endless war for endless evolution. No, we actually can say that, and it's not anti-Semitic to say it. If you want to set up a situation where we have to support Zionism or a bunch of Semitic people are killed and a bunch of people who are not Semitic, and then play this card, you're no different than the left. And you have no right to do this. And we're not going to accept it no matter what you do. So it's a hierarchy of valuation. It's not anti-capital or anti-having money or trade or human dignity and self-organization. But it cannot be the highest principle. Neither can abstract lowest common denominators of these religions. And they can't all be true and claim revelation if they're conflicting. We have to have apologetics, and we've taken that off the table and tried to syncretize a version of Christianity off of these errors, to incorporate these errors. And if we go into, I'm going to get into this, I'm especially going to focus on this text here of Fr Seraphim Rose, back when he was Eugene Rose. And this is a more philosophical text. I touch on the theology because it matters what the religions teach, but I'm focusing more actually on the historical, the political, and the philosophical, because I'm not a theologian for the church. This is a personal political channel. And education on history and getting into things we're not allowed to talk about in a more sober manner than what you're going to get from these people who are becoming somebody right now, right? So let's get into here. What are we doing here with this dialectic? Because there's a bigger dialectic here, which is the nihilist dialectic, which destroys the belief. So we go through the classic liberal phase is what he gets into here, putting liberalism before God. I want to go into the opening here, though. Anyone aware of the two obvious imperfections and evils of modern civilization that have been the more immediate occasion and cause of the nihilist reaction, though we shall see that these two have been the fruit of incipient nihilism, cannot but feel a measure of sympathy with some, at least, of the men who have participated in the reaction. Such sympathy may take the form of pity for men who may, from one point of view, be seen as innocent victims of the conditions against which their effort has been directed. Or again, it may be expressed in the common opinion that certain types of nihilist phenomena have actually a positive significance and have a role to play in some new development or history or of man. So the latter, you see Peterson doing this. He comes in, and you're bringing in all these great men of the past. You're Nietzsche, who does have insights. You can get insights for these people, but we're not trying to incorporate their errors. Now you got to have Nietzsche to be integrated, right? You could be Nietzsche and Carl Jung, because he could make a way that fits within semiotics that can give justification to religion by the game that your enemy is playing. Jordan Peterson always says, don't play your enemy's game, or you become the more successful expounder of their pathology. So if you're playing the game of these Dawkins and these atheists and everybody that's destroyed religion and all these esotericists, and Gnostics, who, whether they were extracted out through Hegel and we go into pure empiricism, rank empiricism and rank materialism, if you're going to, what can be allowable by that and get measure on religious phenomenology, because the only thing that's allowable to be talked about is what is measurable, and then have some possible shadowy Platonic idea that doesn't actually ground or justify anything or give you any authority over what a religion is, and try to blend them together, well, you're incorporating the errors of these people. You're incorporating Jung's Gnosticism. You're incorporating Nietzsche's errors. And Father Rose here heavily addresses Nietzsche, and he looks into his insights, but he doesn't incorporate them. I think Dr. Peterson, too, because he believes in this idea of integration and steel manning, almost keeps Nietzsche this kind of caustic force that's like the alchemical breaking down of things, the Negrito and the alchemist ideas. That's things decompose, but then something new comes out of them. I think he uses Nietzsche as his own internal steel man, who's always breaking things down, and you can only be real, and you can only have a real belief if it can stand in the face of that. So he's got to constantly tear himself apart to face this caustic, acidic blackness and say that being is good, because you become more of a Zoroastrian than a Christian, really, and you eminentize everything in that manner. So being is good. We would agree with that being is good, But being is not God. This is the mistake Gemestos Platon starts making. We immanentize everything and we get into this modalist collapse, and it leads to the empiricism. Then if it's going to reclaim anything, it has to go through these mystic and esoteric roots that are coming in and making a false Christianity through this mysticism. And you're seeing the very science and empiricism that came out of this mysticism and destroyed its own religious aspects is now through what Fr Seraphim Rose would call the fight after you get through the classic liberal phase where we all just believe in the same thing and everything becomes an abstraction and you have no actual truth. The next phase is realism, empiricism. Now the only thing that's real is measure, but that leaves out all metaphysical truth. The next stage is the vitalist stage, where all this stuff gets integrated in. And then you end up in the nihilism of destruction. And this will lead us to a new age. So we've gone through like multiple cycles of this and gone through these destructions. Well, like all the horrors of the 20th century he always talks about, Dr. Peterson. In this vitalist stage, now we're bringing in all this esotericism and occultism is coming in through, and it's being normalized. So science that comes out of this alchemy and replaces God in something that looks a lot like at least the pattern in the Book of Enoch. Jonathan Pajot actually has a really good video about that. You're seeing this kind of technology without God, without man waiting for God, this apotheosis where we try to become like gods without God's grace and following the revelation and subjecting religion to science first. Now you get measure on religious phenomenology, which doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Lucifer can pretend to be an angel of light, and you're bringing this in because you say it's good. And you see people having visions of a being of a light that are light workers, and they're saying Lucifer is good. You have to integrate this. So to take these issues and say modernity's bad and there's no belief, but then go to these so-called great men and start incorporating your Gnosticism, H.G. Wells, Arthur C. Clarke, Aldous Huxley, they talk about the Promethean Luciferian elements being good, needing to be integrated. Jordan Peterson goes to the source of what he's fighting. One of the sources is Chiliasm, dispensationalism, the idea that we can make it like a new covenant with God and get out of the tribulations and make a kingdom of heaven on earth. He goes to Joachim Fiore so he can have the Catholic tradition and made his own Joachim Fiore church online and have this Catholic tradition without the Pope, because now you transcend the law and the need for the hierarchy. You can become your own Pope like in Protestantism, but you still get to have your tradition here. And you're in a lot of the structures, and the semiotic structures of the religion. Well, this is part of where this Chiliasm, dispensationalism comes out of, and it ends up breaking out over and over again. In some of the worst cases, like the Munster Rebellion, they become communists. And they try to kill everybody. It's like a microcosm of the French Revolution. They go into polygamy. They have a little reign of terror. And a lot of this is already there in Gemestos Platon that we talked about, who came out of Byzantium when they shut down the academy because it kept heading in this direction. You're seeing this stuff, this dispensationalism. It breaks out and eventually becomes kind of deistic and secular in the Jacobins in the French Revolution. This is the same utopian idea. These are dispensationalist ideas that become the very spirit of the age. And if you can't look at that big picture and the general spirit and where all these things are heading, we're going to have a new age, a new dispensation. This is what undergirds the Zionism as Protestant dispensationalism. Chiliasm, they're going to bring in a new age. They're going to bring in the apocalypse, but escape the tribulations and make a worldly kingdom of heaven and make a worldly Messiah. Christ will come back as a worldly Messiah instead of on the clouds for the final judgment. Completely wrong. But you see this attitude breaks out, and it's almost like we naturally head towards this. Probably because we desire the true eschaton, but when we don't actually get it properly, we get it wrong. But this is the very same thing that undergirds all the utopian schemes of the World Economic Forum, but he's still building himself on these types of ideas. You're incorporating the eras and you're making them look good. You're not going to be able to have an antichrist come and make peace unless he actually makes things work and makes peace. He actually has to have something that can be perceived as good, just as you could say in many ways the Romans were good. Even though they were diabolical and had pederasty and raping people in the Colosseum and murdering people and bestiality, and were driven by demonic energy, they still engaged in some of the virtues and upheld the civilization. There has to be some good, or the evil would not be perceived as good, because you wouldn't do it otherwise. So you're incorporating these errors until we get something that portrays itself as Christian and godly and true when it's actually false. And this is where the inversion will come in. And we're already set up for that because we're completely cut off from what's good. We're completely upside down right now. We can't even tell what a man or a woman is. So we start to see that here, this is the mistake. I want to read it again. You can see that may be expressed in certain types of the nihilist phenomena actually have a quote-unquote positive significance and have a role to play in some new development of history or of man. And the evolutionist ideas and sociological ideas that look at like things that went wrong in history as a science experiment, but now we're going to get it right. We got to keep incorporating error because something exists, so it must be good. This is Harari. If it exists, it's good. The latter attitude, again, is itself one of the more obvious fruits of the very nihilism in question here. But the former attitude, at least, is not entirely devoid of truth or justice. For that very reason, however, we must be all the more careful not to give it undue importance. It is all too easy, in the atmosphere of intellectual fog that pervades liberal and humanist circles today, to allow sympathy for an unfortunate person to pass over into receptivity of his ideas. The nihilist, to be sure, is in some sense sick, and his sickness is a testimony to the sickness of an age whose best, as well as worst, elements turn to nihilism. But sickness is not cured, nor even properly diagnosed by sympathy. In any case, there is no such thing as an entirely innocent victim. The nihilist is all too obviously involved in the very sins and guilt of all mankind that have produced the evils of our age, and in taking arms, as do all nihilists, not only against real or imagined abuses and injustices in the social and religious order, but also against order itself and the truth that underlies that order. The nihilist takes an active part in the work of Satan, for such it is, that can by no means be explained away by the mythology of innocent victim. No one, in the last analysis, serves Satan against his will. And he goes on here to say that the one thing that's behind all of this, if we were to get into all the elements and theories and people and clubs and elites that are behind these things, this is partly, we do this, I would say I'm doing it to point to how bad things are and that we can't ignore this and you need to actually come to the truth. But the one thing that's behind it all is the devil. Now I'm going to skip ahead here. Liberalism. The liberalism we shall describe in the following pages is not, let us state at the outset, an overt nihilism. It is rather a passive nihilism, or better yet, the neutral breeding ground of the more advanced stages of nihilism. Those who have followed our earlier discussion concerning the impossibility of spiritual or intellectual neutrality in this world will understand immediately why we have classified as nihilist a point of view which, while not directly responsible for any striking nihilist phenomena, has been an indispensable prerequisite for their appearance. The incompetent defense by liberalism of a heritage in which it has never fully believed has been one of the most potent causes of nihilism. The liberal humanist civilization, which in Western Europe was the last form of the old order that was effectively destroyed in the Great War and the revolutions of the second decade of this century, and which continued to exist, though in an even more attenuated democratic form, in the free world today, may be principally characterized by its attitude to truth. This is not an attitude of open hostility or even of deliberate unconcern, for its sincere apologists undeniably have a genuine regard for what they consider to be truth. Rather, it is an attitude in which truth, despite certain appearances, no longer occupied the center of attention. The truth in which it professes to believe, apart from, of course, from scientific fact, is, for it, no spiritual or intellectual coin of current circulation, but idle and unfruitful capital left over from the previous age. The liberal still speaks, at least on formal occasions, of eternal verities, of faith, of human dignity, of man's high calling, or as unquenchable spirit, even of Christian civilization. But it is quite clear that these words no longer mean what they once meant. No liberal takes them with entire seriousness. They are in fact metaphors, ornaments of language that are meant to evoke an emotional, not an intellectual response, a response largely conditioned by long usage, with the attendant memory of a time when such words actually had a positive and serious meaning. No one today who prides himself on his sophistication, that is to say, very few in academic institutions, in government and science and humanist intellectual circles, no one who wishes or professes to be abreast of the times, does or can fully believe in absolute truth, or more particularly in Christian truth. Yet the name of truth has been retained, as have been the names of those truths men once regarded as absolute, and few in any position of authority or influence would hesitate to use them, even when they are aware that their meanings have changed. Truth in a word has been interpreted. The old forms have been emptied and given a new quasi-nihilist content. This may be easily seen in a brief examination of several of the principal areas in which truth has been reinterpreted. In the theological order, the first truth is, of course, God, omnipotent and omnipresent creator of all, revealed to faith and in the experience of the faithful, and not contradicted by the reason of those who do not deny faith. God is the supreme end of all creation, and himself, unlike his creation, finds his end in himself, everything created in relation to and dependence upon him, who alone depends upon nothing outside himself. He has created the world that it might live in enjoyment of him, and everything in the world is oriented towards his end, which, however, men may miss by a misuse of their freedom. The modern mentality cannot tolerate such a God. He is both too intimate, too personal, even too human, and too absolute, too uncompromising in his demands of us, and he makes himself known only to the humble of faith, a fact bound to alienate the proud modern intelligence. A new God is clearly required by modern man, a God more closely fashioned after the pattern of such central modern concerns as science and business. What were we just talking about? Free market. Free market comes above this. Abraham Accords come above the truth, come above God. You're anti-Semitic if you say God comes first. It has, in fact, been an important intention of modern thought to provide such a God. This intention is clear already in Descartes. It is brought to fruition in the deism of the Enlightenment, developed to its end in German idealism. The new God is not a being, but an idea. What do you mean by God? God's like the thing that stops you. No matter what, it's always there when you can't do anything else yourself. Or it's your potential, or it's Tate. God's what gets me a Bugatti. Not revealed to, and what does he put forth? He puts forth the money too. We already talked about that. They will take the mark to be somebody and continue to survive in the beast system. Because the only thing that's going to save you is having a lot of money. Not revealed to is the new God is not a being but an idea. Not revealed to faith and humility, but constructed by the proud mind that still feels the need for explanation when it has lost its desire for salvation. This is the dead God of philosophers who require only a first cause to complete their systems, as well as of the positive thinkers and of religious sophists who invent a God because they need him, and then think to use him at will, whether deist, idealist, pantheist, or immanentist. All the modern gods are the same mental construct, fabricated by souls dead from the loss of faith in the true God. The atheist arguments against such a God are as irrefutable as they are irrelevant, for such a God is in fact the same as no God at all. And this is what we reduce everything to if we just make God some kind of sociological thing and say, well, culture's had this and we don't know how to make good things afterwards, but we'll somehow smash these things together and get a new religion. And you see the psalmist also talks about how the wicked men will often say, God does not see us, he is not there, to justify doing evil deeds. Atheism is pretty handy when you want to do evil things. And if you put money first, well, why can't somebody evil who makes money call themselves successful? So here we have this case where you're seeing this idea that markets are going to solve everything. And this was why they also wanted to get rid of Russia and traditionalism and funded communism. The biggest driver of communism has been capitalism. All this insanity we're seeing, all this left-wing insanity is back to the hilt by capitalism. And communism has a libertarian end goal as its state, liberty, rather than hierarchy and service to God. Lucifer is the biggest libertarian there is. If all these libertarians arguing about, I'm the only real libertarian, you're not a real libertarian if this or that, well, Lucifer is the only real libertarian. That's why he's portrayed, he's the villain of Milton's Paradise Lost, but so many new modern thinkers, you can go to Yale Open Courses has a course on Paradise Lost by a complete flaming woke liberal who looks at Lucifer as this great hero and opens up about feminism and how Milton was a feminist and Lucifer's the hero. They completely miss that he's the villain and that he's written this way to show his pride. And if you want to look at the way neoconservative values, classic liberal values, new prosperity gospel, Protestantism, this kind of spirit that's here in America, or American conservatism, and it's a false version of Christianity that's subordinate to this. Look at who was it? Jeremy Boring from the Daily Wire, the guy that runs it. He's all about his pride. He's gay guy wearing his purple furs and shit, talking about there's no value in anybody being poor. You're a loser if you aren't. And this is the type of thing where the capitalism becomes before the Christianity. Doesn't mean you're a bad person if you succeed, but here Jordan Peterson will often measure himself on whether or not he's good or true. He says he uses capitalism to measure that, but pornography is very successful off of capitalism. So do we get a total truth? You could get maybe some evidence if you're trying to do something positive, but you could also get a bunch of people who are hearing what they want to hear. You're not total. You're just talking about one piece of evidence here, and it could be wrong. To make this the first truth instead of lowering it in hierarchy. Same with the science. The science needs to be lowered in the hierarchy. That's how we get to this place where science comes first, and you get the problems of natural theology and process philosophy and process theology. And out of humanism and trying to get good human aims, it becomes anti-human because it's anti-truth and it's not based in real truth. You go into these classic liberal abstractions. And part of this was started for the very same reasons they spread all this stuff with capitalism. It was started when Protestantism and the Enlightenment happened. Geneva was a capital of Protestant. It was a capital of capitalism. Calvin's Geneva. The merchant class started trying to bump the church out. And so did the princes, so did the kings, because they wanted their nationalism to be free from the church. But this was backed by the mercantile class as well. That happened with the Medicis, and you see all this esotericism and stuff. You see cycles of this empiricism as well as vitalism and this nihilist dialectic. So one of the things that happened during the Enlightenment and the rise of capitalism is it was easier to say we all believe the same thing, to be comfortable and keep doing business. If the Arab has the same God as the Jew and as the Christian, then we all can all do business, and mammon comes first. Mammon doesn't come first, and we're not anti-Semitic for saying that or for pointing out facts that not every Jew was like sitting there looking like the cartoon drawing of the evil Jew that's going to jump out of the bushes because he's rubbing his hands together for your shekels. But, some of the Jews who wanted out from underneath the Christian thumb and also wanted to subvert Christianity and retake their homeland did support this because it empowered them. And part of this was also the way they were treated in Europe. If you got to remember, you had warrior castes and usury was a sin. So banking was often left to the Jewish people. So they were in a position to be very rich and powerful once the mercantile class and the banking became something very important. They were primed to have influence and power, and by making capitalism more important, they would be invested in pushing these types of ideas that capitalism comes before religion, and that their religion is of equal import and respect, even if the Talmudic version was started by the Pharisees. That is something that happened. It's not anti-Semitic to state a fact. Doesn't mean I hate all Jews or that all Jews subscribe to that, or that people can't have all sorts of evil beliefs, and we wouldn't want them to come to Christianity and don't have to get along with people at times, but we don't have to let these types of ideas that are bad have power over us. That's not evil or anti-Semitic to say that. And the longer all you people over there that don't want to say nothing to your bosses, to the system, to all of big con and conservatism, well, the more it's going to become predominant, and the more people start to discover these facts that, however inconvenient they are and politically incorrect, or that they could lead to anti-Semitism, well, when people start discovering these facts, they're going to become real anti-Semites and play into this dialectic that's going on. So now we can see how this capitalism is used and was a goal here and was used against Christianity and still is. And it's still supported by Christian conservatives here in America that are okay with the Orthodox being persecuted and who still somehow overlay a dumbass, Cold War narrative over the current situation with no idea about these facts. No idea at all. Russia, Libya, and Syria. Islamists have likewise proven useful within the Russian Federation. We're back to the Bolton text. The primary pro-Chechnya lobby in the USA was the Freedom House-founded American Committee, and we can remember from a previous chapter, Freedom House, the influence they had in pushing degeneracy and wokeness and race politics, American race politics, in France. Martin Luther King. That was actually a very good, I did some good commentary on that one. The Freedom House founded American Committee for Peace in Chechnya. This included some of the most notable neocons and Zionists: Richard Pearl, Elliot Abrams, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Kenneth Edelman, Midge Decter of the Heritage Foundation, Frank Gaffney of the Center of Security Police, Bruce Jackson of the U.S. Committee on NATO, Michael Leedon of the American Enterprise Institute, and former CIA Director R. James Woolsey. It is strange that of these enthusiasts for the rights of Muslims in Russia, all but Abrams and Leedon were members of the Arch-Zionist Project for a New American Century, founded in 1997, a sub-branch with a study group on a new Israeli strategy towards 2000 headed by Pearl, which prepared a blueprint for the reorganization of the Middle East that calls in particular for regime change in Syria and Iran. This seems to be the plan that is being followed. And we've seen even Tulsi Gabbard, who was against all these regime changes, is on board with this shit now. While the ACPC changed its name to American Committee for Peace in the Caucasus, it seems to have become largely defunct since 2013. That is the year of the Chechen bombing in Boston. Wayne Madsen, writing for the Strategic Culture Foundation, commented, quote, "After revelations that an entity called the Caucasus Fund was used by the CIA-linked Jamestown Foundation of Washington, D.C. to sponsor seminars in the North Caucasus and Tbilisi from January to July 2012, Georgian authorities moved to shut down the fund. The reason given by Georgia was the organization had fulfilled its stated mission. Caucasus Fund and Jamestown Foundation events were attended by accused Boston Marathon bomber Tamerlan Tsarnaev, a citizen of Kyrgyzstan, born to parents from Dagestan. Jamestown had previously held a seminar in Tbilisi in Hidden Nations in the Caucasus, while, among other issues, promoted a greater Circassia in the Caucasus." Madsen remarked of the general strategy. U.S. humanitarian and civil society assistance to radical Islamist groups has, for the past 3 decades, filtered into the coffers of terrorist groups celebrated as freedom fighters in Washington. This was the case with U.S. support from the Afghan Mujahideen through such groups as the Committee for a Free Afghanistan during the Islamist insurgency against the People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan in the 1980s and the Bosnia Defense Fund in the 1990s. In the case of Afghanistan, U.S. and Saudi money ended up in the hands of insurgents who would later form al-Qaeda, and in Bosnia, the U.S. funds were used by al-Qaeda elements fighting against Yugoslavia and the Bosnian Serb Republic, and later al-Qaeda elements supporting the Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA, in its war against Serbia. Terrorists supported by the USA to oust Gaddafi were sent to Syria to continue the American Jihad against stable states. The CIA had been funding a Libyan rebel army since 1988, Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army. Haftar had been living for 20 years in Virginia prior to returning to Libya, with CIA and Saudi backing. Patrick Cockburn commented in The Independent, "Even shadier is the background of Abdul Hakim al-Hassadi, a Libyan who fought against the U.S. in Afghanistan, was arrested in Pakistan, imprisoned probably at Bagram, Afghanistan, and then mysteriously released. The U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, James Steinberg, told congressmen he would speak of Mr. Hassadi's career only in closed session." Mossad destabilization. Israel has sought to keep the entire region in a state of destabilization. This serves several factors. A constant state of conflict portrays Israel as the only stable entity in a volatile region. Destabilization ensures that there can be no united front against Israel's aspirations, which are never ending. And you just saw Ben Shapiro today. He had a tweet that said, Israel makes civilization. They make a stable civilization. Arabs live in sewage and bomb shit. Well, if you destabilize their fucking countries, buddy, yeah, they'll live in sewage, right? And the justification just to fucking kill people because what, you have superior civilization. Well, what happens as our civilization continues to bottom out? Well, the Chinese have a more technically superior civilization to us, even though they live in a technocracy where you can have your views scanned by artificial intelligence and then sent to retraining. Should we accept that because they're more superior to us? Or if the World Economic Forum comes out with a bunch of, DARPA tech, should we accept that we have to live like the way they want us to do because they're more technically sophisticated than us and richer than us? This is a stupid fucking view, and this is the bottom root of having, give me Barabbas. This is what happens when you put the world first. This is what happened at the bottom of the mountain when the Israelites were scared. They were scared, and Moses was gone. So then they turned to a worldly idol. The golden calf was actually a military type of god that also gave you worldly wealth, and they were worried about the armies of Pharaoh coming. So they had a real legitimate concern, just like all these people that think we need to side with Islam or side with Zionism or side with mammon and wealth before God to stop a legitimate threat. But we're fragmented, and every group is only seeing one problem, and then they're justifying anything to solve it. This is the issue here. This is Shapiro's own morality, and we're actually at the mercy of the people that are winning at capitalism, neoconservatism. And he doesn't care because he's such a committed Zionist who's likely got Mossad ties that doesn't matter. Just wipe these people out because they're the superior people. The notion of Jews being surrounded by mad Arabs keeps the Israelis in a state of preparedness and unity. Israel went to the extent of backing the Red Brigades, and it's kind of funny that they're in constant preparedness. David Patrick Kerry was talking about this at Church of the Eternal Logos today. He talked about how Charlie Kirk, who's such a pro-Israel guy, he was even when he was talking about cultural Marxism being prevalent in the Jews and complaining about it, and a couple hours later he had a thing saying God blesses those who bless Israel with his hand on the wall wearing the yarmulke. But he noticed, hey, I've been to Israel all the time, and we have all these IDF guards. How did they just let this attack happen? Brett Weinstein was correct to criticize this. So it's not just us Orthodox and conspiracy theorists or those America First people or the Jackson Hinkle people that noticed this. There was something very suspicious about this, and the timing, and the fact it's coming before an election season, and it's when the U.S. is losing in Ukraine that this happens. I don't think it was an accident at all. I think everybody involved wants war. The Arabs want out from under our thumb. They want war. They want the U.S. and Russia to weaken themselves fighting, and they want their own autonomy. And if they got to be subservient to Russia, they'd rather have that than being subservient to us and all the degeneracy we're spreading. And they definitely don't want Israel there. Israel wants to retake the Holy Land. The globalists want to get in here and get war powers and not be thrown out and to not have an election. Everybody here wants war. The only way we can say blessed are the peacemakers and make peace would be to actually become a good nation and repent. It's the only way we're going to defeat these people that are in charge, not by our own means. And it's going to be winning against that corruption and winning for truth here that allows us to say no to what's going on over there. That would allow us to get out of Ukraine or maybe sue for a peace and enforce it between Russia and us. Have to become a Christian nation again, and have two Christian nations actually enforce peace between these two groups that are hostile to Christianity. We shouldn't be dragging ourselves into this over people that are hostile to us. Should never have gotten ourselves involved in this. You could say we still have a responsibility here because we installed people and to not allow a genocide. Blessed are the peacemakers. Israel went to the extent of backing the Red Brigades in Italy during the 1970s as part of a destabilization strategy, indicating the extent of the strategy. According to the magistrate Fernando Impasinato, who led the investigations in the 1978 kidnapping and murder of former Prime Minister Aldo Moro, at least until 1978, Israeli secret services had infiltrated Italian subversive groups, He said that based on confessions of jailed guerrillas who turned police informers, there had been an Israeli plan to destabilize Italy. The plan aimed at reducing Italy to a country convulsed by civil war so that the United States would be forced to count more on Israel for the security of the Mediterranean, the judge said. The extent of this destabilization strategy has included Mossad backing of Islamists at an early stage. According to a UPI news report, in 2002 Hamas bombing of a Jerusalem city bus, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon immediately vowed to fight Palestinian terror and summoned his cabinet to decide on a military response to the organization that Sharon had once described as the deadliest terrorist group that we have ever had to face. Active in Gaza and the West Bank, Hamas wants to liberate all of Palestine and establish a radical Islamic state in place of Israel. It has gained notoriety with its assassinations, car bombs, and other acts of terrorism, but Sharon left something out. Israel and Hamas may currently be locked in a deadly combat, but according to several current and former U.S. intelligence officials, beginning in the late 1970s, Tel Aviv gave direct and indirect financial aid to Hamas over a period of years. Israel aided Hamas directly. The Israelis wanted to use it as a counterbalance to the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, said Tony Cordesman, Middle East analyst for the Center of Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Israel's support for Hamas was a direct attempt to divide and dilute support for a strong, secular PLO by using a competing religious alternative, said a former senior CIA official. According to the U.S. administration, official funds for the movement came from the oil-producing states and directly and indirectly from Israel. The PLO was a secular and leftist and promoted Palestinian nationalism. Hamas wanted to set up a transnational state under the rule of Islam, much like Khomeini's Iran. And you have to remember, too, when we got involved in Iran, we got involved in their religion, we tried to liberalize it. We pushed degeneracy, we used the Epstein Island model there to blackmail people, and we also applied this to the Vatican. It's part of the reason the Vatican is so messed up. And we went in through the P2 lodges. So you got to see, the same way I brought up an Orthodox saint saying that even under the horrors of the Turkish rule for 500 years, communism was worse because it estranged people from God. You have to remember some of this reaction you're getting here, whether it's Hamas or Iran, is the fact that they would rather die than have us pervert their religion. And you're seeing a religious uprising now in America against the perversion of our religion, saying, no, we cannot have capitalism come before religion anymore. So by this logic these people are putting up, anybody who's conquered first or done property exchange is okay, because if they're doing it peacefully, but they conquered you before, you have no right to stand up for yourself and say no to the degeneracy. And that's all being pushed. We all have to be civil sheep. So no, we don't want to turn into extremists and have everybody killed, but we do have a right to defend ourselves, and we don't have to accept this. And we've gone through all kinds of peaceful measures. So I have some sympathy here for the Muslims, and I would say it's not just a top-down conspiracy by Mossad. They have to find somebody who's willing to be jihadists. But there's a reason besides Islamism that they want to have this. And we as Christians, we are sent for, we don't have a religion. We don't believe we have a religion. We have a kingdom that was ordained by Christ. All the other religions are false, and we are told to go forth and to proselytize. So we cannot force people to become Christian. There's free will, so we're at a disadvantage sometimes to the Muslims there, especially to people who want to reduce this to sociology and see how fast a religion spreads or how militaristic it can be and how much it can be reduced to human logic. But we do believe that we are supposed to go out there even with this free will and win the hearts, and also win the arguments and defeat falsehoods with some discernment when it's time to lay the hammer down and when it's also time to be humble. We are supposed to convert people, and the world will work if there's enough people that convert to Christianity and enough righteous men, such as in Sodom and Gomorrah, when God said he would spare it if he could find one righteous man. We believe that about the monks at Mount Athos. So we're here to also proselytize the world, just like the Muslims are. The Jews are another story. The officer explained to Ostrovsky that this would be done by circulating counterfeit money. The strategy was confirmed by Mossad defector Viktor Ostrovsky, who was told by a prominent Mossad officer that a decision was made to destabilize Jordan to the point of civil anarchy. The officer explained to Ostrovsky that this would be done by circulating counterfeit money and arming religious fundamentalist elements, similar to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, which we also played a big role in, especially the British, assassinating leading figures who are the symbols of stability, causing riots in the university to prompt government repression. Look anything like what's going on right now with our instability? They have this down to a science now, by the way. The plan was also to destabilize Egypt in the same manner, with Mossad running guns to Egyptian fundamentalists through Afghanistan. Ostrovsky further relates that Mossad had to come up with a new threat to the region, a threat of such magnitude that it would justify whatever action that the Mossad might see fit to take. The attitude of many in Mossad and elsewhere in Israeli ruling circles is that in order to maintain Fortress Israel, the constant threat of war needs to be maintained. This is what's also done in 1984 when the population is always hit by rockets from its own government to say they're always at war with Eurasia or whoever. You see, the support of this radical terror justifies the response of Israel to go in and wipe these people out and displace them. And then those people are feel themselves to be justified to involve themselves in a type of terror where as many people as are killed as necessary to bring the entire Arab world in and break support for Israel. So both of these people are working eschatologically, and they've worked with each other. They both hate each other, and they've worked with each other. Hamas, the jihadists, have accepted support from Mossad, their enemy, knowing that it will lead to large numbers of innocent people being wiped out, and the Israelis, knowing that many Jews are going to be killed, and that they will go in and kill many innocent people in Palestine, have funded evil terrorists so that they will have justification to go in there and kill people. Both of these groups that hate each other work with each other, and we've been hostage taken into choosing between one of these two groups. Supporting the radical elements of Muslim fundamentalism sat well with Mossad's general plan for the region. An Arab world run by fundamentalists would not be a party to any negotiations in the West, thus leaving Israel once again as the only democratic, rational country in the region. I had a guy here telling me today, look at all the times Palestine rejected deals. They rejected deals. They could have had their own state this way and that way. Well, they rejected it partly because Netanyahu himself has said you have to back Hamas to stop them from forming a state that the West will respect. So we can say, those savages always rejected a deal. They could have had a deal. It wasn't our job to put these people in here to make deals. If you put people in and take their land, they might not want to make a deal. And if Mossad could arrange for Hamas to take over the Palestinian streets from the PLO, then the picture would be complete. The destabilization dialectic is the same as that being enacted on a global scale by the USA to maintain its global ambitions. Since the Soviet boogeyman no longer exists as justification for U.S. global ambitions, the boogeyman of the global war on Islamic terrorism was quickly created as a substitute. While Putin has been demonized to at least keep the semblance of a Russian boogeyman intact, it cannot convincingly be said that Putin aims at world conquest. However, Islamism is a new threat to the world peace, with a world jihad and the aim of imposing Sharia law over the world. This new global threat must be met under U.S. leadership, which generally means U.S. domination, politically, economically, and even morally and culturally, or what has been described as the New World Order. The study group for New Israeli Strategy stated that Israel's aims must be to, quote, work closely with Turkey and Jordan to contain, destabilize, and roll back some of its most dangerous threats. This implies clean break from the slogan comprehensive peace to a traditional concept of strategy based on a balance of power. Change the nature of its relations with the Palestinians, including upholding the right of hot pursuit for self-defense into all Palestinian areas and nurturing alternatives to Arafat's exclusive grip on Palestinian society. Both aims have been fulfilled. As we have seen, the backing of jihadists involves the use of Jordan and Turkey, and the primary target is Syria, now that Saddam has been eliminated from Iraq. While the blueprint was addressed to Israel, one can see the role being played out by the USA in its fulfillment. Quote, Israel can shape its strategic environment in cooperation with Turkey and Jordan by weakening, containing, and even rolling back Syria. This effort can focus on removing Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, an important Israeli strategic objective in its own right, as a means of foiling Syria's regional ambitions. Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, aka the Caliphate. Suddenly ISIL, or ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, snaps onto the scene to pose the biggest threat to world peace, whose path to terror also happens to be a march through the states that have been marked for destruction by the Neocons. Syria particularly. Like Haifa in Libya, later Syria, the head of the Islamic State organization, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has links with the USA. He was a civilian internee at the U.S. internment center in Qasr, Iraq. He was unconditionally released in 2009. What can be said is that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's declaration of himself as Caliph of all Muslims worldwide has spread further factionalism among Muslims. Despite the universal repudiation among even radical Muslims, U.S. foreign policy strategists are building up ISIL as the most potent Islamic force. Asim Barkawi, the spokesperson for the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra Front, an erstwhile ally of ISIL in the Syrian war, spurned al-Baghdadi's claim to a universal caliphate, countering, in short, al-Baghdadi and ISIL have no support whatsoever among Muslims. They are loathed even by their fellow ultra-Salafis, Wahhabis, and Takfiris. On the other hand, terrorism expert William McCants of the Brookings Institute said that to the New York Times, ISIS is now officially the biggest and baddest global jihadi group on the planet. Nothing says hardcore like being cast out by Al-Qaeda. Dr. Kevin Barrett, an Arabist scholar, regards it likely that al-Baghdadi is a mind control asset from his time at Qasr camp. Quote, the secrecy surrounding al-Baghdadi's 5 years in U.S. custody strongly suggests that the self-proclaimed Caliph of Islam is actually a Muslim version of Jim Jones. His Islamic State is a Muslim Jonestown. It is designed to mass suicide Islam by turning Muslims against each other. William Engdahl, a foreign policy specialist, opines, and by the way, Engdahl has some great talks with Dyer, and Dyer has studied his stuff. Key members of ISIS, as it now emerges, were trained by U.S. and CIA and Special Forces Command at a secret camp in Jordan in 2012. According to informed Jordanian officials, the U.S., Turkish, and Jordanian intelligence were running a training base for the Syrian rebels in the Jordanian town of Safawi in the country's northern desert region, conveniently near the borders of both Syria and Iraq. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the two Gulf monarchies most involved in funding the war against Syria's Assad, financed the Jordan ISIS training. Advertised publicly as training of the non-extremist Muslim jihadists to wage war against the Syrian Bashar Assad regime, the secret U.S. training camps in Jordan and elsewhere have trained perhaps several thousand Muslim fighters in techniques of irregular warfare, sabotage, and general terror. The claims by Washington that they took special care not to train Salafist or jihadist extremists is a joke. How do you test if a recruit is not a jihadist? Is there a special jihad DNA that the CIA doctors have discovered? In 2012, Aaron Klein reported that Egyptian officials had talked of training being given to terrorist forces to be deployed to Syria by the USA, Turkey, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. The training camp was at the Jordanian town of Safawi. Among the tangled intricacies of the Middle East imbroglio, a course was established to bring chaos to the region, formulated by think tanks where American and Jewish messianists converge. Their recommendations appear as the ones being enacted, but these strategists themselves are the heirs to the aims of long duration and politicized religious fanaticism that is obscured by a worldwide barrage of propaganda about a new Muslim threat.